Welcome back. Still to come, remember that ludicrous proposal for single pilot aeroplanes? Now, unbelievably, the push is still on. I'll chat with the hero pilot Richard de Crespigny shortly. But first, the Attorney-General, Mark Dreyfus, this morning introduced the actual legislation that has the question in it that you'll vote on very shortly this year. It obviously went into the House of Representatives. There'll be a whole process. There'll be parliamentary inquiries. Let's assume it gets passed by the Parliament. It will then be put to you for a vote in October, between October and December this year. And the PM is not for turning. He says it's modest change and he's relying on the emotion and goodwill that almost all of us have for Aboriginal people. We all want their lives improved. Question is this the right way to do it? Last night in the House of Reps, Keith Woolahan, Liberal member for the seat of Menzies in Victoria, delivered an important adjournment speech about the significance of the Voice referendum and a fair amount of constitutional detail.
Australia's constitution contains little of the soaring rhetoric which is familiar in the constitutions of many other lands. That is one of its strengths. The wording that has been proposed, and I must admit, when people asked me over the last 12 months what wording would come, I never thought it would be this radical. I really didn't. It's not modest. When the questions are put from this side and indeed throughout this nation about justiciability, they are serious questions that should be answered, and it concerns me that they haven't been asked and answered on the side of the government.
I'm thrilled to say Keith Woolahan joins us now. Of course, before Parliament, he was in the military and he is also a barrister, as well as Chris Merritt, Legal Affairs contributor at the Australian, Vice President of the Rule of Law Institute of Australia. Gentlemen, welcome. Keith, terrific speech last night. I know you don't get a lot of time on these adjournment speeches, but you got to the nub of the issue. And I think the points you made about the primacy of the voice once it's in the Constitution, regardless of what the PM says, he says, just get it in there and we'll fix it up if we have to via a parliamentary piece of legislation. You hit the nail on the head. Tell us why that's so important. Australians understand the point you're making.
Thank you, Peter. One of the things I noticed when I'm in the Parliament is that sometimes in the gallery above us are primary school students who come to visit. And whenever we talk about the voice, I realise that this will last, if it passes, long beyond the people in the Parliament now. And if it is not a good thing for our democracy, and we are a good democracy, but if it detracts from it, then we have failed them, we've failed future generations. So what we are debating this year, I think there's no more serious things than we turn our mind to. And when we see questions put to the other side, there's this visceral reaction that how dare you ask questions, because they want to focus on the emotion and they want to focus on feeling. But emotion and feeling won't matter in the High Court when they actually interpret the text and there are consequences to how we govern ourselves.
Well, let's go to that point of interpretation, Chris. Two of the experts the Prime Minister likes to quote, Anne Toomey and Professor Williams. We'll start with Anne Toomey. She made the point in the Australian today that the voice can make representations and that it cannot be altered or limited by an Act of Parliament once the voice is enshrined in the Constitution. Now, help people understand that point, because the PM likes to think it can be retrofitted, fix it up after the event if it goes too far. That's not constitutional law, of course, is it?
We've got about a century of precedents showing that what the Prime Minister is trying to argue just won't fly. If it's in the Constitution, it's the responsibility of the High Court, and the High Court will determine what the legal effect of provisions in the Constitution are, and that goes all the way through to the obligations and implications on public servants and ministers and cabinet and maybe even the Governor-General. So I think Anne Toomey and George Williams have come around to the correct traditional interpretation of the Constitution.
I'll just stay with you, if I can, on that point, Chris. And of course, once you've got it in the Constitution, the voice will do whatever the voice will get away with, let's be honest. And it is only if it is challenged and that presumption of scope is tested in the High Court that it will get limited or perhaps even conferred as being appropriate. That's the decision the court will make. Now, the issue there, of course, is a government, presumably, has to then take the voice to court. I can't see Labor ever challenging if they think the voice has gone too far.
Look, I think you're right, Peter. Look, I must admit, I come to this part of the debate more in sorrow than in anger. I'm very, very sorry that the debate is, there are specific facts that should be out there on the table and explained. We've also got continuing abuse by the Yes case of proponents like Greg Craven, who have now pointed to problems with this. I think this is the wrong way to go about this debate. It's been covered in secrecy right from before Gama. There's been no convention, there's been no input from the general community. I think the coming parliamentary inquiry, with the greatest respect to members of Parliament, I think it will fall short. This Constitution is owned by the community. It's not the property of members of Parliament. And to limit the involvement of the community in a major change to the Constitution, I find it unforgivable.
What about the legal advice, Keith Woolahan? Solicitor General consulted. We haven't seen the legal advice. The government says they won't release it. We know obviously there was toing and froing with the Attorney General. You look at legislation every single day you're in the Parliament. There's plenty of material that sits behind it. There's pages and pages. There's an explanatory memorandum. There's committee reports. This seems to me to be very light on detail.
It does, and that's why I fully support the approach by Peter Dutton. And there was a lot of pressure on him to form a view quite early, but Peter was quite rightly asking for detail throughout the process because it matters. And let me give you an example, Peter, of the inconsistency in the answers to those questions. In the Karma-Langton report, which we were all told had the detail, it says that non-justiciability, meaning you shouldn't and can't go to court, is an essential feature and should be an essential feature. And then Professor Langton, weeks later, said that to have that view reeks of subconscious racism. So when we ask questions and they either don't give an answer or the answer changes, there's real questions that have to be explored in this committee. And full disclosure, I've been appointed to that committee. And it's not ideal. I wish there was a proper constitutional convention, but we have to make the most of it and we have to use that time to put these questions to the experts because Australians deserve that detail if they're going to make an informed view.
I'll get a comment from both of you on Lorraine Finlay's comments. She's our Human Rights Commissioner. She said she's concerned. She says this inserts race into the Australian Constitution in a way that undermines the foundational human rights principles of equality and non-discrimination. Keith, I mean, this is the dividing line for me from the outset. I can't support the voice on principle, very much like Lorraine Finlay.
Principle is quite a simple argument. You either believe in equality of citizenship or you don't. The separate issue which the committee will focus on is constitutional risk, and that involves a lot more questions and detail. But Lorraine hit the nail on the head in terms of principle.
And Chris, of course, we've got obligations on a whole raft of international treaties, don't we?
And the one that counts was not properly considered in the material that was tabled in Parliament today. I'm talking about Article 1.4 of the Convention for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. That makes the point that you can make temporary mechanisms that advance people of a particular race, but they must be temporary and they must come to an end when a particular goal has been reached. That means putting it in the Constitution and making it permanent will place this country in breach of a convention that it ratified in 1975.
All right, I'll leave it there. Chris Merritt, thank you. As always, Keith Woolahan, great to have you on the program. Federal member there for Menzies. It's a seat in Metropolitan Melbourne. Thank you both for your time.